Hello, everybody. I'm talking to you from the scenic Bass Rocks establishment here in Eastern Point, Gloucester, on June 8th, 2026. I'm about to give a demonstration on the technique of Impressionist painting, which I've learned over the years, principally from a teacher named Henry Henchy in Provincetown, about whom some of you know very well. The technique will show the audience and also painters who are interested in it just how you put together the colors in an Impressionist painting to make the image appear like a three-dimensional image, even though it's on a two-dimensional surface. So I've started, as you see here, laying in a very brief outline of the subject matter, which is a vase with some bright yellow flowers in it. It's basically a simple thing, but that in terms of the various colors involved is very complex. The important thing for people to understand when they're trying to construct a painting of this nature is not to get too bogged down in the detail from the beginning. Us Impressionist painters do not rely principally on the drawing in order to create space and light in what we make. Our reliance is principally on color and the very precise matching of contiguous colors one to the other. So what you'll see here as this demonstration goes along is my wrestling with a kind of Rubik's Cube of areas in the painting and try to match them up so that together as a whole they create the impression of a three-dimensional object in space. Well, over here we have a schematic of my process, which I've used as a teaching tool for a long time. It comes out of a demonstration that Mr. Henchy did many years ago that show the progressive creation of an image from crude matching of color right up to the final stage. And then I actually have an oil painting that he did from one of his demonstrations that show what happens when you pull it all together. And up above it is the subject, which I hope to be able to recreate on canvas in much the same way. Now you can see I'm addressing the first issue here, which is to try to create the relationship between this background color, which I've laid in, and this surface. I've made it much too light and much too white. But because I'm using this method, a Rubik's Cube method of trying to put these different areas in boxes, I can now warm this up so that it is closer to the real relationship that exists out there, and it takes me one step further toward giving the correct relationship. So now if you look over there at the subject matter, you can see as I've warmed it up, this relationship becomes a lot closer to what's there. And I'm going to do this all over, just with the big areas first, and get the shadow in, and then get this contrast in. I'll probably start demarcating the light side and the dark side. Now I've managed to match up these relationships here, and I'm slowly crawling across the canvas from one to the other, to the other, to the other, to make sure that one-on-one they're matched with each other. When I get finished doing it, then I'm going to look back and look at the whole thing and then try to make it more harmonic. And finally, at the end of it all, as the demo shows you, I'll close up all the edges and make the thing come out, the image come out more sharp. But I don't dare do that right away. Now every painting has a world of its own, and within that world the artist has to understand the rhythm. So the artist is prone to exaggerate certain aspects of the painting for dramatic effect, and also to create a greater feeling of space. In this case, I have, in order to further the demonstration, I've enlarged the pot in relationship to everything else, and I've kept the files relatively small so that I can make them come out in space, and I don't have to worry about fighting that battle later on. You're beginning to see how the image exists in space purely because of the color relationships. And as it goes on, I put more detail in, then I'm going to bring the image out so that it actually comes out at you. I'm trying to fight what the actual real color relationship is here. This is much oranger, and I have to be very careful because I don't want to overdo it. Let's see if this works. Maybe it's too much orange. We shall see. We'll try over here. It's still not orange enough. How strange. Things look different when they're down on the palette. Maybe we'll try a little reddish brown, just a tiny touch. It goes a long way. That gives it, see what it did? Oh my goodness. I think it ruined the whole thing. What do you think? And if it ruins the whole thing, throw it away and start over. That's what you could do with a palette knife. You can't do that with a brush. And now you see I'm just going to start all over again and say, I made a mistake and I'm going to have the right color and I'm going to do it right. See, that's the virtue of this painting technique. There. All right, now we got good orange. Let's see if that works again. We'll try over here this time. Yeah, that's more like it. Let's go with that and see what happens. Great. I'm so glad to be here and to participate in this wonderful annual occasion, and also to share with you what little I've learned from my years of studying art and responding to nature. Really, to me, the creation of a painting is really exercise in seeing. If you can't see it, you can't paint it. And I think that, as Yogi Bear once said, you can observe a lot by just watching. Yeah, I think that's a really goofy statement. When you really think about it, the guy was dead right. Because people see all the time, and I say, well, that's a tree over there. But do you actually grasp what the color of that tree is in space or not? The human mind is such that it's categorized, and if you're not really interested in getting to the meat of anything, you go on to the next thing because you're going from one serious interest to another serious interest and then relaxing every now and then. So what I'm doing here is to try to stop that process when you open your eyes and actually look at something and introduce you to a way of seeing that's different. Most people will tell you that Claude Monet was the father of Impressionist painting. That may be so or not. Other people say, well, it was other guys that really started it. You could never get Monet to tell you what he was or even what he did. He always said, I don't belong to any movement one way or another. If you want to find out what I do, look at my paintings. So the fact is that his art came to fruition in a period of intense scientific and artistic revolution in the 19th century, in which people began to discover that there was a whole art to seeing, and that the process of taking in an image is more than just a grade school exercise with a crayon. Just to cut to the chase, the fact is that what you're mostly seeing is an image that's translated through your eyes to the back of your head through a medium. And what's that medium? The medium is the air between you and it. You don't think about it because, you know, you breathe it, you go through it, it doesn't feel like anything at all. But when you really analyze it, you have to realize that people who are experiencing the flood of smoke from Canada now can attest to that. The air is full of stuff. It's full of water vapor, it's full of pollution, it's full of smoke. Monet used to love smoke, as you probably know, those of you gone to see his pictures. And what he was really trying to get people to see was that the ultimate result of the image in the back of your head is something that you perceive through its air. So how do we get to creating an art that's built on that? The way we get to a creative art that's built on that is to break it down and break it apart. What I do, my teacher was a guy named Henry Hinchy in Provincetown. Maybe some of you may know about him. He was a wild-eyed individual. He taught in Provincetown for many years and influenced a lot of New England painters. But he had developed a method of analyzing a visual image and putting it on a two-dimensional surface. And he did it by what I would like to call the calculus of color. Now, I'm not a mathematician, but Mr. Descartes came to a wonderful discovery many, many years ago. He realized that you can describe any object mathematically by breaking it down into smaller and smaller parts, and as those parts approach infinity in smallness, the image imaginally came out, and it was mathematically described. We're doing exactly the same thing here. We're taking big chunks of visual experience and matching them up against one another and fussing around with it until, like a Rubik's Cube, it comes together and the image comes out at you, not by virtue of the drawing, but simply by virtue of the careful matching of one color against another. That is not what most people understand when they hear you talk about Impressionism. Impressionism is some guy with a funny hat on that runs around and has impressions of things. No. The actual study of Impressionist painting is a very careful and almost exhausting study of how color works to create images in the back of your head. And if you faithfully do that and follow techniques such as this, you'll be able to create images. I created this image in a couple hours. And I didn't do it because I sat there and drew it. I didn't do it because I copied a photograph. I didn't do it because I went to art school. I did it because I learned how to put these colors right up next to one another in a meaningful fashion so that when they get here, they're very, very close to what's over there. If you work hard at using this technique, at first it's difficult, like riding a bicycle. You have the training wheels, and then at the end of the day, suddenly you're out there and you're riding down the road and you're making it stand up, and everybody says, gee, that really looks like a photograph. And you tell yourself, haha, some photograph. So anyway, I could give you some tips and tricks of the trade for those of you who are artists or want to be artists. One of the things you've got to worry about is cleanliness. 99 and 44 100% of painters out there are painting with what? The brush. They take their brush and they say, oh, this needs a little more green. So they dip it in green. So they say, no, it's getting too green. Let's add some blue. So they go to the blue. What do you suppose they end up on their palette? You look at your typical palette. It's a mess. The colors are all mud. Why are they mud? Because the guy got lost. He put muddy colors on his brush and he got muddy colors up here. How do you get around that? You use this little tool called a palette knife. Now, it's very difficult. But if you want to mix a color that's clean, you take your little palette knife, wipe it off, you dip it in the color, you put it over here. If you want to add another color, put it over here. And you mix it around like that. You've got a little puddle of color. And that little puddle of color is just discrete, it's different. If you need it in order to round out a corner of a petal, there it is for you, right? I don't have to mix it up again. I don't have to mess it up. And all right. Another thing is something very simple. The light falling on your face. I use a sword fisherman's cap, but other people could use other things. Why is that? Because when I'm outside, I can do anything I want to make sure that that sunlight is not straining my eye and messing me up in terms of the color that I'm trying to put on the canvas. Here's another trick of the trade. Most outdoor painters will paint away from the sun or sideways from the sun. If you really want to get an image that comes out, you need to get the light on the other side and paint into the shadows. Next time you go to the museum, take a look at the Impressionist painters. They're always painting up into the shadows. Why? Because you get definition out of the object in space. And it's much easier to get the thing to stand up. The light from behind you flattens everything out. Trick of the trade. I mean, you learn it the hard way, unless somebody tells you, you got bad breath, by the way. It's the same thing here. Get your easel, whatever it is, set up so that you're not having the light over your shoulder. As far as the colors are concerned, I think you should start out with a standard student palette, which has all your cool colors down here in one corner and the warm colors up at the top. They're readily identifiable, and you try to keep it as simple as possible, like the clubs in your golf bag. You can have no more than 13, and some people think that's a bad thing, but I've heard about guys that went through a whole 18 holes with nothing but a pitching wedge, and you could do that too if you want. Keep it simple, stupid. Don't overload yourself with gimmicks and other things that you think are going to help you succeed. And I think that trying to keep it clean and trying the discipline of saying, that's not the right color. Then you just scrape it off if it's oil painting. Scrape it off, put it down here, get rid of it, and do it over again until it gets absolutely right. Right, absolutely right. Look at this here, for example. What's missing? I threw that in there because it was supposed to be a nice dark color and to bring out the pot. If you really look at this relationship, this is much too blue. It's picking up light from the outside. But what it's really doing is picking out the warm light from this spot, which bounces off it. Why didn't I do that, and why didn't I put it in there? Because I was afraid that if I did that, it would flatten everything out. But if I were going to work on this further and build it out further, I'd be starting to mess around with all these colors in the interiors and get them really matched so that they sang together. And there are all these little painter's tricks. All of a sudden, here's a pot and it's got a glaze on it. I put a couple of dots in there, which is they're there, and you could do that kind of stuff, but don't do it until you've got the basic stuff down, and you have enough solidity so that you can fool around with it a little more. For example, down here, you've got a little more orange coming through. Right? What happens is that now all of a sudden is more round. But you learn these things by trial and error.